The over 40 individual often wakes up to a world that feels a little less sharp than it did a decade ago. It is a subtle dimming, a morning brain fog that settles over the mind like a persistent mist. Most of us have been taught to accept this as an inevitable tax of aging, a natural slowing down of the internal gears. We look at our calendars and our birth dates, resigning ourselves to the idea that mental fatigue and cognitive decline are simply part of the package. But this acceptance is based on a misunderstanding of our own biology. What if the exhaustion you feel is not a failure of your character or an unchangeable consequence of time, but the result of a specific, measurable biological event? We need to reframe the narrative entirely. We must move away from the vague idea of getting old and look toward the concept of microbiome dysbiosis. This is the true antagonist in the story of our health after 40. Deep within the internal human ecosystem lies a complex world that functions like an internal rainforest. This ecosystem is not just an observer of your health. It is the primary driver of how you feel, how you think, and how you age. When we talk about the gut-brain axis, we are not speaking in metaphors. We are describing a hardwired physical connection that serves as the foundation for your cognitive clarity. As you navigate your fourth decade and beyond, the tone of voice within this ecosystem begins to shift. Think of your gut as a whisperer that has spent years guiding your brain with clear and supportive messages. However, when the diversity of your microbial inhabitants begins to thin out, that whisper becomes a frantic shout. This change in communication is what we call the invisible shift. It is a disruption in the gut-brain axis that sends ripples of instability throughout your entire nervous system. This is a quiet revolution that happens beneath the surface, affecting your mood and your memory before you even realize the garden is in trouble. Before we go any further into the mechanics of this internal collapse, it is vital to acknowledge the source of these insights. Every protocol discussed on this channel is reviewed by a clinical pharmacist and researcher. This institutional trust ensures that the information you receive is grounded in rigorous evidence and clinical precision, providing a safe roadmap for those seeking to reclaim their biological vitality. We are not just looking at theories. This is the hard science of longevity, verified to ensure that every step you take is backed by expert analysis and data. The gut-brain axis is the great information highway of the body, a two-way street where messages are constantly being exchanged between your digestive system and your mind. When your internal garden is thriving, the messages are those of growth, repair, and focus. But when microbiome dysbiosis takes hold, the signals change. The gut begins to transmit a form of biological static. This noise travels upward, crossing the thresholds of your physical being and entering the delicate structures of your brain, clouding your judgment and your ability to process information quickly. This static does not just cloud your thoughts, it alerts the microglia. These cells are the brain's resident police force, designed to protect and serve the neural environment. However, when they are bombarded by constant distress signals originating from an imbalanced gut, they can become overactive. They go rogue, shifting from a state of protection to a state of aggression. This is the beginning of the neuroinflammatory cascade. It is a slow-burning fire within the nervous system that disrupts communication between neurons and accelerates the aging of your most vital organ, leading to long-term cognitive issues. You might feel this as an inability to remember a name, a heavy sensation, or an emotional volatility that seems to come from nowhere. These are not senior moments. They are the physical manifestations of an ecosystem in distress. The link between the variety of species in your gut and the sharpness of your intellect is absolute. When the rainforest thins, the mind dims. We are standing at the threshold of a new understanding of human health. The decline of the gut is not a permanent sentence, but it is a call to action. Before we continue exploring how this garden thins, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Understanding this connection is the first step in your private revolution to restore the balance and clear the mental mist. The path to reclaiming your focus begins by listening to the quietest parts of your internal world. The internal rainforest of the gut is an intricate tapestry of life, but as you pass the milestone of 40, the once vibrant colors of this ecosystem begin to fade. This is not a sudden collapse, but a gradual thinning of the microbial variety that once defined your youthful resilience. Imagine a dense jungle where every plant and animal has a specific role in keeping the entire environment stable. Over time, due to the cumulative weight of years of lifestyle stress, environmental toxins, and subtle biological shifts, the diversity of these species begins to decline. This loss of microbial diversity is the foundational reason why your body no longer responds to the world with the same elasticity it once possessed. It is a biological thinning that leaves your internal defenses weakened and your cognitive functions vulnerable to the static of inflammation. When we talk about dysbiosis, we are describing an imbalance that feels very real in your daily experience. It is helpful to think of it like a garden being overtaken by weeds. In a healthy state, beneficial bacteria act as the diligent caretakers of your internal landscape. They prune the dangerous growths, nurture the soil, and ensure that every nutrient is recycled efficiently. But as the biological clock ticks forward, the environment itself begins to change. One of the most significant shifts involves the production of gastric acid. After 40, many individuals experience a natural and steady decline in stomach acid levels. This is a critical change because stomach acid serves as your primary chemical gatekeeper. It is designed to neutralize opportunistic bacteria and pathogens before they can ever reach the delicate environment of the small intestine. When this gate weakens, the weeds of the microbial world find an opening to take root and flourish. Simultaneously, the natural motility of the digestive tract begins to slow down. You can think of your gut as a complex conveyor belt that must keep moving to prevent stagnation. When this belt slows, the internal ecosystem becomes more like a pond of still water, rather than a flowing mountain stream. This stagnation allows certain species of bacteria to overgrow in areas where they do not belong, effectively crowding out the delicate, beneficial microbes that are essential for your cognitive health. This creates what scientists call the diversity gap. There is a direct and measurable correlation between the variety of species living in your gut and the sharpness of your intellect. A diverse gut is associated with better memory, faster processing speeds, and a more stable emotional state. When that diversity erodes, the clarity of your thought process begins to erode right along with it. Many people find it incredibly frustrating that they can no longer eat the way they used to without consequence. You might find that foods which once gave you energy now leave you feeling heavy, bloated, and mentally sluggish. This is because the ecosystem collapse has changed the way your body processes both information and nutrients. Even if you try to eat healthy, the foundation may be so compromised that your body can no longer extract the intended benefits from those nutrients. It is not just about what you put into the system, it is about the state of the system itself. If the soil of your internal garden has become depleted and packed down, simply planting new seeds will not result in a lush harvest. You must address the underlying environment that has been shaped by 4 decades of living. This shifting landscape within your gut is far more than a simple digestive issue. It is a fundamental shift in how your body communicates with your brain. The opportunistic bacteria that thrive in a state of dysbiosis do not have your long-term health as their priority. They produce metabolic byproducts that can cross the intestinal barrier and enter your bloodstream. These are not the helpful messengers of your youth, but rather inflammatory signals that tell your nervous system it is under constant attack. This creates a state of low-grade, systemic tension that never truly turns off. You might feel this as a persistent irritability, a lack of morning motivation, or a feeling of being overwhelmed by tasks that used to seem simple. Your internal garden is sending out distress signals, and your brain is the primary recipient of this bad news. As we delve deeper into this biological reality, we see that the decline of the gut is a silent driver of accelerated aging. When the microbial diversity thins out, the protective barriers of the body begin to fray. This is why the 4th decade is such a pivotal time for intervention. The choices you make now are no longer just about feeling good today. They are about preserving the integrity of your mind and the health of your cells for the next 40 years. The erosion of the internal rainforest is a significant challenge, but it is one that can be understood and eventually addressed. By recognizing that your cognitive decline is linked to this hidden ecosystem, you gain the power to change your personal narrative. We are looking at a biological process that is as predictable as the changing seasons, yet as malleable as the earth in a well-tended garden. Understanding the mechanics of this collapse is the only way to begin the vital work of restoration. Every choice becomes a way to either feed the weeds or nurture the flowers in the garden of your mind. To understand how the thinning of your internal garden translates into the mental fog you experience daily, we must examine the literal hardware of this connection. Running like a sophisticated fiber optic cable from the base of your brain, down into the deepest reaches of your abdomen is the vagus nerve. The name itself comes from the Latin word for wandering, and it is an apt description for a nerve that weaves its way through your chest and stomach, touching almost every major organ along the path. In the context of the gut-brain axis, the vagus nerve acts as the primary information highway, a massive communication link that allows your internal ecosystem to speak directly to your centers of thought and emotion. For the over 40 individual, this highway often becomes the carrier of news that the brain is not prepared to handle effectively. There is a common misconception that the brain is the sole conductor of the human body, issuing orders that the rest of the organs simply follow. However, the reality of the gut-brain axis is far more complex and surprising. Modern research, which has been meticulously reviewed by our clinical pharmacist and researcher for this protocol, reveals that this highway is characterized by massive bidirectional traffic. But here is the critical part. Roughly 80 to 90% of the nerve fibers in the vagus nerve are sensory fibers. This means that 80 to 90% of the information is traveling upward, from the gut to the brain, rather than downward. Your gut is not just listening to your brain. It is constantly briefing your brain on the state of your internal world. When you are over 40 and experiencing the early stages of microbiome dysbiosis, the report being sent up the vagus nerve is often one of distress and instability. Imagine this vagus nerve as a phone line that never hangs up. At the other end of the line, in the lining of your intestines, are specialized cells known as enteroendocrine cells. These cells act as the eyes and ears of your nervous system within the gut. They have the remarkable ability to taste the environment of your digestive tract. They sense the presence of specific nutrients, the levels of different hormones, and most importantly, the metabolic byproducts of your bacteria. When your microbial diversity is high, these cells detect a balanced environment and send signals of safety and nourishment to the brain. This results in a state of calm, focus, and cognitive clarity. But as dysbiosis takes hold, these scouts begin to taste the presence of inflammatory markers and opportunistic bacterial debris. They report this back to the brain as a generalized threat. This is where the quality of the message becomes a defining factor in your quality of life. When the gut is in a state of imbalance, it does not send clear, distinct data. Instead, it sends a form of biological static. The brain receives these constant distress signals and must find a way to interpret them. Because these signals are coming from the same ancient pathways that once warned our ancestors of physical danger, the modern brain often interprets this gut-derived static as anxiety, irritability, or a persistent sense of lethargy. You might find yourself feeling a strange, low-level dread, or a lack of motivation that has no clear cause in your external life. In reality, your brain is simply reacting to the negative reports coming up the vagus nerve from an ecosystem that is struggling to maintain its diversity. This connection is not just an abstract concept, it is a physical sensation that many over 40 individuals know all too well. We often speak of a gut instinct or a knot in the stomach when we are stressed. This is the vagus nerve in action. It is the physical manifestation of your internal garden communicating its state to your consciousness. When you feel a heavy sinking sensation in your midsection during a stressful afternoon, you are experiencing the vagus nerve reacting to the chemical environment of your gut. As the microbial diversity shifts, this knot can become a permanent fixture of your daily experience, a silent weight that drains your mental energy before you even begin your day. The vagus nerve also influences what we call vagal tone, which can be thought of as the tension or the health of this communication line. High vagal tone is associated with the ability to recover quickly from stress and maintain emotional balance. However, the systemic inflammation caused by microbiome dysbiosis can degrade this tone, making the highway less efficient and more prone to sending false alarms. This creates a feedback loop where the gut is stressed, which stresses the brain, which then sends signals back down that further disrupt the digestive process. It is a cycle that accelerates the feeling of aging, making you feel more fragile and less resilient than you were a decade ago. As we continue to explore this highway, it becomes clear that the secret to reclaiming your cognitive sharpens does not lie in the brain alone. It lies in changing the narrative that the gut is sending up the vagus nerve. By understanding that 80 to 90% of the conversation starts in the gut, we realize that we can influence our mental state by changing the chemical environment that these enteroendocrine cells are tasting. The information highway is always open, and for the over 40 individual, the goal is to ensure that the messages traveling to the brain are ones of stability, health, and abundance, rather than the static of a thinning rainforest. We are moving toward a period where the quality of this internal conversation will determine the very pace of your biological clock. While the vagus nerve acts as the physical highway for electrical signals, there is another, perhaps even more influential vital system at play, the chemical currency of your internal ecosystem. The production of short-chain fatty acids becomes the literal backbone of cognitive resilience. These molecules, primarily acetate, propionate, and most crucially, specifically butyrate, are the metabolic byproducts created when your beneficial bacteria ferment dietary fiber. Butyrate stands out as the master architect. It is the primary energy source for the cells that line your colon, known as colonocytes. When your microbial diversity is high, butyrate is produced in abundance, ensuring that these cells remain healthy and tightly packed together. This biological process of short-chain fatty acid biosynthesis is the foundation of a resilient gut. However, as the internal garden thins and microbiome dysbiosis sets in after your fourth decade, the production of these life-sustaining fatty acids begins to plummet. This is not just a digestive issue, it is a structural failure with profound consequences for the brain. Without sufficient butyrate, the cells of the intestinal wall begin to starve and weaken. The gaps between these cells, known as tight junctions, are meant to be the gatekeepers of your body. To manage these gates, your body uses a specific protein called zonulin. Under normal conditions, zonulin acts like a sophisticated security guard, briefly opening the gates to allow nutrients to pass, and then locking them tight. But when the gut environment becomes inflamed, and the short-chain fatty acid supply dries up, zonulin levels begin to spike. This excess of zonulin keeps the doors of your intestinal wall wide open, leading to zonulin-mediated permeability. This is the biological reality behind what is often called leaky gut. In this state, the protective barrier that was meant to keep bacterial fragments and metabolic toxins out of your systemic circulation is compromised. For the individual over 40, this breach is dangerous because the body is already dealing with a naturally declining rate of cellular repair. These foreign substances, such as lipopolysaccharides, leak into the bloodstream, triggering a systemic immune response that puts your entire body on high alert. The danger does not stop at the gut wall. There is a terrifyingly direct connection between the integrity of your gut and the integrity of your brain. The same mechanisms that regulate the intestinal barrier also influence the blood-brain barrier, which is the ultimate security gate protecting your most vital organ. When your gut is leaking, your brain is often leaking as well. This leaky brain connection is a critical focus for longevity research. Evidence suggests that the systemic inflammation triggered by a compromised gut barrier can lead to a similar breach in the blood-brain barrier. This means that the metabolic toxins and inflammatory markers that escape the gut are now able to cross into the sensitive environment of your central nervous system. This is a silent infiltration that bypasses your primary defenses and begins to cloud your mental clarity from the inside out. This breach of security is what drives the profound sense of cognitive fatigue that many people attribute simply to the passage of time. When these external molecules enter the brain, they disrupt the delicate chemical balance required for rapid thought. You might experience this as a feeling of heavy thoughts, where every mental task requires twice the effort it used to. It is the sensation of a metabolic fog making it difficult to maintain focus. This is not a failure of intelligence. It is the physical result of a compromised gatekeeper. Butyrate also has the remarkable ability to travel through the bloodstream and cross the blood-brain barrier itself for a positive purpose. In a healthy state, butyrate acts as a signaling molecule in the brain that promotes the production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a protein that acts like fertilizer for your neurons. It helps your brain grow and remain plastic. When your gut diversity fails and butyrate production drops, your brain is effectively deprived of this essential fertilizer at the very moment it needs it most to combat aging. The decline in cognitive sharpness is therefore a double-edged sword. You are simultaneously losing the protective fuel of butyrate while being bombarded by the toxic infiltration caused by zonulin-mediated permeability. Every protocol on this channel, including the steps to address this permeability, is reviewed by a clinical pharmacist and researcher to ensure that the methods for restoration are grounded in rigorous science. The silent infiltration of these toxins creates a background noise in the brain that prevents high-level processing. For the over 40 individual, reclaiming this sharp focus requires more than just willpower. It requires a fundamental repair of the gut barrier and a restoration of the short-chain fatty acid currency. By understanding how the loss of butyrate leads to the unlocking of the gates via zonulin, we can target the root cause of mental dimming. Reversing this transition from a protected brain to an exposed one is the key to maintaining your intellectual edge for decades to come. This is essential for life. As the metabolic toxins and fragments of bacteria infiltrate the brain through the compromised blood-brain barrier, they encounter the most sensitive security system in the body. This system is managed by the microglia, which serve as the resident police force. However, when the over 40 individual experiences a constant influx of inflammatory signals from a leaking gut, the microglia undergo a profound and dangerous transformation. They transition from watchful protection to chronic activation. This is what science refers to as microglial activation, which is the primary driver of the neuroinflammatory cascade. When the microglia go rogue, they lose their ability to distinguish between threats and your own healthy neural architecture. They release inflammatory cytokines and chemicals that damage your synapses. This is not a sudden explosion of pain, but a slow, smoldering fire within the neural tissue. You do not feel this fire as a physical burn, but as the sensation of hot brain fog. It is that feeling when your mind feels overloaded, where your emotional fuse is shorter, and where you struggle to find the right words in a conversation. This internal fire consumes enormous amounts of metabolic energy, leaving little for high-level cognitive functions. This is why the over 40 individual often feels a sense of intellectual exhaustion by mid-afternoon. The brain is literally fighting against the rogue activity of its own immune system. But the impact of microbiome dysbiosis extends even deeper into our emotional core through the regulation of neurotransmitters. Approximately 90% of the body's serotonin, the chemical responsible for stability, is synthesized in the gut. When your internal garden is thriving, specialized cells receive the right signals to produce serotonin in abundance. However, when the ecosystem collapses, the production line is severely disrupted. The inflammatory environment in the gut can even divert the raw materials of serotonin toward the production of neurotoxic compounds. At the very moment your brain needs serotonin to soothe microglial activation, the supply is being cut off at the source. This is why gut health is so inextricably linked to cognitive decline as we age. This chemical imbalance eventually reaches the hypothalamus. This triggers the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is your body's primary stress response system. For the person over 40 with gut dysbiosis, the gut sends a non-stop signal of distress. This forces the HPA axis to remain in a permanent state of fight or flight. This relentless pressure leads to dysregulation, where your body loses the ability to modulate its response to the world. The adrenal glands become overtaxed and eventually exhausted. This results in chronic stress that further degrades the gut lining. High levels of cortisol are destructive to the beneficial bacteria in your internal rainforest, which reduces microbial diversity and creates a brutal, self-sustaining feedback loop. The more your gut suffers, the more your brain stays in a state of neuroinflammation and stress. This stress then circles back to further damage the gut. Breaking this loop is the primary challenge for anyone seeking longevity and mental clarity. You cannot simply think your way out of a physiological stress response driven from the bottom up. For the over 40 individual, reclaiming cognitive health requires addressing the fire inside the brain by first cooling the fire in the gut. Every protocol on this channel is designed to intervene in this cycle, and as always, every step is reviewed by a clinical pharmacist and researcher to ensure precision. By quieting the rogue microglia and restoring the production of serotonin, we begin the process of calming the nervous system. This is the only way to stop the accelerated aging process and restore the intellectual vibrancy that should be yours. It is a slow and deliberate process of reclaiming the internal narrative of your body. As we move forward, we will see how these biological markers translate directly into the visible signs of aging and the hidden speed of your biological clock. Reclaiming the gut-brain axis is not just a biological necessity, but a vital step toward long-term mental clarity and emotional resilience. The journey from chronic inflammation to cognitive clarity is paved with consistent actions that support the ecosystem living within you. This restoration is about reclaiming the very essence of who you are as a human being. The consequence of this persistent internal fire is a phenomenon known to science as inflammaging. This term describes a state of chronic, low-grade inflammation that essentially puts the biological clock of the individual over 40 into a state of overdrive. When the gut is in a state of dysbiosis, the systemic inflammation does not stay contained within the digestive tract or even just within the confines of the brain. Instead, it radiates outward, affecting every single cell and every strand of tissue. The skin, being the largest organ of the body, often acts as a visible map of the health of your internal ecosystem. When microbial diversity is low and the gut barrier is compromised, the body's ability to repair collagen and manage oxidative stress is significantly diminished. This is why the person over 40 might notice that their skin loses its elasticity more rapidly, or that their face carries the weight of a constant tiredness. It is not just the passage of time. It is the physical manifestation of an ecosystem in distress. The accelerated aging we witness on the surface is a reflection of the fire happening beneath the surface, driven by the constant leakage of inflammatory markers into the bloodstream. We have been conditioned by society to accept cognitive decline as an inevitable destiny, a series of unavoidable senior moments that we simply have to endure as the price of living longer. However, the reality provided by modern research is far more empowering. These lapses in memory and the general dimming of mental quickness are symptoms of a manageable biological process rather than an unchangeable fate. By shifting the focus from simply surviving to actively managing the gut-brain axis, the individual over 40 can actually slow the hands of their own biological clock. You have the power to influence the speed at which your cells age by changing the environment in which they live. This brings us to the core philosophy of intervention, which we refer to as biohacking the axis. To restore the internal garden, we must move beyond the surface-level approach of taking a random probiotic capsule and hoping for the best. While probiotics introduce transient visitors to the gut, they do not necessarily rebuild the foundation of microbial diversity that has been eroded over decades of lifestyle stress. True restoration requires a more precise and sophisticated use of prebiotics. Prebiotics are the complex fibers and specialized compounds that act as the primary fuel for your beneficial bacteria. Think of these prebiotics as the specialized fertilizer required for the rare and vital plants in your internal rainforest. By providing these specific fuels, you allow the existing, struggling colonies of beneficial bacteria to thrive and multiply once again. This process of intentional feeding is what allows the short-chain fatty acid currency, particularly butyrate, to be minted once again within your own body. As the levels of butyrate rise, the gut lining begins to heal, and the signaling to the brain becomes one of safety and nourishment rather than distress. Every protocol on this channel is reviewed by a clinical pharmacist and researcher to ensure that the intervention strategies we discuss are based on the hard evidence of how these specific compounds interact with your unique physiology after the age of 40. As you begin to restore this diversity and seal the gaps in the intestinal wall, the systemic consequences are truly profound. The first thing many individuals notice is a significant shift in their sleep quality. A healthy gut-brain axis is essential for regulating the production of melatonin and managing the critical evening cortisol drop-off, which allows for a deeper and more restorative rest. When the brain is no longer under the constant siege of neuroinflammation, the quality of sleep improves dramatically, which gives the microglia the time they need to perform their actual job of cleaning and repairing the brain. Furthermore, the metabolic health of the individual begins to stabilize in ways that feel effortless. The gut microbiome plays a central role in how we process energy and regulate our blood sugar levels. When the balance is restored, the debilitating midday energy crashes begin to fade away, and the stubborn weight that often accumulates after 40 becomes much easier to manage. The restoration of the axis ripples through the entire body, turning back the tide of accelerated aging and allowing your intellectual vibrancy to return. This is about reclaiming the functional integrity of your body and mind so that you can navigate the second half of your life with the same sharpness you once took for granted. The path toward longevity is found in the steady and intentional cultivation of your internal world. The final step in this transformation is the implementation of the longevity protocol, which is a systematic approach to restoring the balance that time and stress have eroded. This protocol is not a list of restrictive rules or a fleeting trend, but rather a profound rebuilding of your internal soil. We begin this journey by intentionally expanding the variety of plant fibers in your daily life, aiming for at least 30 different types of plants every single week. This diversity is the primary method for stimulating the production of short-chain fatty acids, specifically butyrate. As we have discussed, butyrate serves as the fundamental currency of a healthy gut, providing the energy your cells need to repair the intestinal wall. When you feed the struggling colonies of beneficial bacteria with these specific prebiotics, you are effectively healing the lining and closing the gates that the protein zonulin once held open. This restoration of the physical barrier is the first and most critical move toward clearing the fog from your mind. As the physical barrier of the gut strengthens, the message sent up the vagus nerve shifts from a frantic distress signal to a steady hum of stability and safety. To further soothe this great information highway, the longevity protocol integrates practices that enhance vagal tone. Simple actions, such as rhythmic, deep breathing and brief periods of cold exposure, can tell the brain that the immediate environment is secure. This shift in signaling is what ultimately tells the rogue microglia to stand down and stop their assault on your neural tissues. By calming the nervous system and restoring the production of essential neurotransmitters like serotonin, the neuroinflammatory cascade that has been clouding your intellect begins to recede. Every protocol on this channel is reviewed by a clinical pharmacist and researcher to ensure that these interventions are as safe as they are effective, providing you with a reliable map through the complexities of your own biology. This journey represents a private revolution for the individual over 40. It is the quiet, daily power of choosing to work with your biology rather than fighting against it. When you restore the gut-brain axis, you are doing more than just improving your digestion or sharpening your memory. You are reclaiming the very essence of your vitality and your sense of self. It is a commitment to understanding that the symptoms of aging are often the cries of an ecosystem in need of balance. Choosing to nourish your microbial diversity and protect your blood-brain barrier is an act of profound self-respect. This protocol, like all others here, is reviewed by a clinical pharmacist and researcher to maintain the highest standards of precision and institutional trust. If this conversation resonates with your intellect and you find value in these evidence-based explorations, consider joining our community for more in-depth discussions. Together, we are building a space where scientific curiosity meets the practical reality of living a vibrant, long life. As you step into this new narrative, remember that the wisdom of the body is a resource that can be unlocked when we provide the right conditions for our internal garden to thrive. There is a deep, quiet satisfaction in watching the mental fog lift and feeling the return of a sharpness you thought was gone forever. It is entirely possible, through these deliberate and scientifically grounded actions, to feel more vibrant, more focused, and more emotionally resilient at 50 than you did at 30. Reclaiming your health is not about chasing youth, but about cultivating a version of yourself that is functional, clear, and wise. This protocol, reviewed once again by a clinical pharmacist and researcher for your safety, is your foundation for that future. The second half of your life does not have to be a story of decline. Instead, it can be a masterclass in biological harmony and cognitive endurance. By soothing the vagus nerve and feeding the silent partners living within you, you are writing a final chapter defined by clarity rather than confusion. The journey toward longevity is found in the steady, intentional cultivation of the world inside you, and that cultivation begins with your very next choice. Trust in the process, honor the science, and reclaim the narrative that belongs to you.